so much for that kind intro. Also, thank you for everyone for being here at this panel today. I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty sure I have the best panel. It's not every day that you get to pick the brains at, a team like this. So I'll just actually get straight to it, if you guys don't mind. If you guys want to do a quick introduction of yourselves, we can do that.
I'm done.
Yeah. Frank took care of it for us.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so first I'm actually going to ask you guys one question individually, and then we'll work from there. I'm actually going to start with Romain. The title of this panel suggests that crypto mining has quite a dirty image. Is that an image that you believe is deserved?
Well, I guess there is something dirtier than the image. But first, let's talk about fact. As Frank was saying, only 0.1% of the energy is used by Bitcoin mining. It's very important to note, because if you want to fix the environment, like it is important to do today in our society, pointing fingers at Bitcoin is not going to solve anything. What is also very biased, I think, in all of the arguments we hear about the energy consumption of Bitcoin mining is that we compare it to some things that are not real. Like, for example, comparing the Bitcoin energy consumption to the energy consumption of Sweden is not fair, because you're comparing a worldwide industry to a small country by inhabitants, of course. I love Sweden. You know what else consumes more energy than Sweden? Playing PlayStation, the dryers, washing dryers, watching the Kardashian on Netflix. So it's too simple to compare apples to oranges in that industry. But because the Bitcoin is very open and very transparent, we are able also to look very precisely at what is a real consumption of energy in our industry. And what we are looking at when we look in details is that more than 58% of our energy that we use is renewable. Some companies like ours, CCU or SATO, our new name, we are 99% using renewable energies. And companies who are not only already using renewable energy are going to use renewable energy in a very near term. That's what all of the players in the industry are saying, at least in the US or in the West. What is also interesting to note when you look precisely or deeply into the industry is that we are more efficient, because Bitcoin is technology, and technology is about being efficient. I've been creating companies in technology for the past 25 years, and it has always been a pursuit of every company that I've been working with, but also with all the people in technology. We are being more efficient with the ASICs that we use, manufactured by Bitmains or now Intel. We are being more efficient in how we manage our heat. We are being more efficient in how we manage our centers. We have new type of technologies like immersion that will also bring more efficiency to the industry. One thing that is also important to note is that today, when you look at Bitcoin mining, the energy that we use is using energy at 100% of the time. So we want to mine and we want to use energy 100% of the time, which is extremely good for the grid, because we don't create spikes when you use energy, and when you have, in the world, usually around like 6 p.m., that's where the country will need more energy. With us miners, we can use the energy when it's less in demand or less needed for the people. So we stabilize the grid of the energy. And finally, one thing that I think is also very important is that in this way to be more performant, we have something that is magical. It's called curtailment. Curtailment means that we can stop mining when the country or the province or the state needs the energy. In a matter of seconds, we can stop our mining operation. So we are not bad for the people. When the people need energy, when it's cold, for example, when we mine in Quebec, we had a very strong winter. They haven't seen that for the past 20 years, I think, since 1994. And we had curtailments. What does it mean? It just meant that we had to stop our operation for a few hours, and then we resumed our operation. So all in all, I think our industry is really going to the right path, doing the right thing. So for me, what is dirtier than the image is people pushing the wrong agenda to say that we are a nasty industry, whereas we are absolutely not, and we are working and showing that we are going into the right direction. So at the end, in my mind, the real waste of energy is to talk about this subject because it's a non-subject.
It is, and as was touched on, there's a lot of misinformation in here as well. There's a lot of bad research. There's a lot of bad data. Jaime, I wanted to ask you, kind of rolling on from the previous question, why do you think the image is so bad? Like, what happened?
It's a very complicated question. I think there are a lot of entities out there that don't want Bitcoin to be successful. I think we struggle even within the crypto community. There are a lot of people, Frank mentioned Ripple's funding of this narrative against Bitcoin, against proof of work mining. Mm-hmm. I think people either don't do all the work, they don't educate themselves enough to understand really how the industry works, that the energy use of Bitcoin is a feature. Mm-hmm. It is paramount to Bitcoin being able to do what Bitcoin does, which is completely different from all other types of cryptocurrencies. And we can get into a debate on proof of work versus proof of stake, but I won't. It is critically important to our success. And I would just point to, we can look at the past as far as anytime there's a great technological advancement, and that's what Bitcoin is. It's this beautiful advancement in technology that is a great disruptor, similar to what email did to the Postal Service. When email was first launched, the US Postal Service went crazy. They said email was going to boil the oceans, all of this energy being used to process these transactions. They tried to introduce a stamp tax. Same thing happened in mobile phones. When mobile phones first came out, they said they were going to boil the oceans because they were using all this energy to charge them. So I just think it's one of the go-to kind of moves when a new technological invention's born, and I think that's what this is.
Yeah.
I would also say, because the ethos is we are decentralized, there's nobody speaking for Bitcoin, it means we are very easy to attack. There's no coordinated way, there's no big marketing vehicle that we can mobilize and counter this head on. So it's people from the industry like us trying to defend, and we brought the Bitcoin Mining Council together to bring a little bit of coordination and education and transparency, but it's really, really difficult to form a coordinated response in a decentralized industry.
Yeah, and I want to touch a little bit more on that later as well. But so, Fred, one of the things that has caught a lot of media attention and attention from politicians too is that there have been a few instances where Bitcoin miners have sort of saved or revived fossil fuel power plants that might otherwise have been retired. And I just want to ask you, do you think this is going to be a common practice? Is this something that's going to be widespread, or do you think these are isolated instances?
I think if you go back to the earlier days of Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin miners were the energy consumer of last resort. So they went and found these stranded power facilities, whether it was hydro facilities in Appalachia that had been built during the 1930s in the US that didn't have customers, or whether it was power plants that had been built for steel mills or aluminum smelters or what have you in Texas, that then when that manufacturing went offshore, those plants became idle. So if you go back to the earlier times of Bitcoin mining, what you had was Bitcoin miners going to these stranded assets because it was very inexpensive electricity, pennies, 1.8 cents, 2 cents. Then, as the industry started maturing, and especially over the last kind of 48 months, you've seen this, the news regarding, energy and carbon consumption becoming a bigger and bigger issue. We made a statement last year at about this time where we made a commitment to be 100% carbon neutral in our mining by the end of this year, which is a very fast transition. In our case, it's a little easier. We don't own power plants. We don't own our data hosting facilities. We work with a third-party model, which is very different in the industry than most people are vertically integrated. So in our case, it's a simple issue of transitioning away from any fossil fuel facilities to carbon neutral. And our model now is to deploy 100% behind the meter at renewable plants. So as opposed to being what's called parasitic loads sitting on the grid, we go to a wind farm, a solar farm, we sit on the grounds of that facility, take the energy that's being generated there, not from the grid, and then when that power is insufficient to feed us, we can take from the grid via contracts that have essentially prioritized renewable sources. And then if there's any non-renewable source, we offset that with renewable energy credits, not carbon credits. Renewable energy credits are, you buy them per megawatt. And it's basically a renewable energy provider sells them to you, and you can use them to offset a non-renewable energy source. But essentially, 60% plus of our energy sourcing is renewable at source, and then we augment from the grid. So I believe that most Bitcoin mining companies, the public ones who want to be in favor with their shareholders, are going to be very ESG compliant. They're going to move towards renewable energy sources. As Frank mentioned, and as Romain also mentioned, the Bitcoin Mining Council tracks these statistics, and we're continuing to move more and more towards greater renewable energy sources. And as an industry, Bitcoin Mining Council members, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 66% for the Bitcoin mining members. Globally, estimate is a little over 50%, is renewable already. Tell me an industry that operates on that much renewable energy today. Also, there is no industry, as Romain said, where you have the ability to, whenever the grid needs the excess energy, shut down a manufacturing process. You can't do this with food processing, oil refining, metal manufacturing, automobile manufacturing, anything. Imagine an industry where in 10 minutes you can shut down half a gigawatt of load when the grid needs it, and 2 hours later turn it right back on with no impact other than the fact you had some downtime. It is a huge buffer to the grid. Power companies in the US, and more so globally, are looking at this as a huge balancer. I'll give you an example. In Dubai, summertime, 4 gigawatts of power needs to be produced to run the air conditioners. Rest of the year, it's only 1 gigawatt. What do you do with that 3 gigawatts of capacity that's wasted? Well, you could do Bitcoin mining because, for one thing, that would help fund the deployment of more renewable energy. In the US, the renewable energy providers view Bitcoin miners as the only incentive to build out more capacity, because there's 14% excess capacity in the US. If you think about how energy, and I don't mean to carry this on for too long, but if you think about how energy is serviced and used, nuclear is at the bottom. It has to run 24/7, 365, and I apologize for those of you in Europe, I'm Swedish by the way, who shut off their nuclear reactors, because that then leaves coal and nat gas. And if you shut down coal as well, it leaves nat gas, and in Europe there's a certain issue with where that's being sourced. Then comes renewable. So you build out all this wind energy, and guess what? It's only available, it's only used when it's needed. Peak load, as Romain said, 4 to 9 p.m. during the day is peak load energy. And so most renewable energy is actually wasted. We waste 8 to 10 times the amount of energy the global Bitcoin network uses every day because we can't consume it. And so the Bitcoin miners are the ideal source for this renewable energy that's otherwise wasted. People who say in the press, oh, Bitcoin miners are stealing the renewable energy from us. That's butkus. Excuse my
Butkus
Americanism.
Just to compliment you're saying, in Sweden, when the toasters come on in the morning or dinners at night, software allows us to go down in minutes from 30 megawatts to 3, and then it come back up. And in fact, the utility company works with us and pays us as a standby facility because we can help the grid. And I think that's what's really important for people to realize, the significance of this. And the other part was when you mine Ethereum, you use GPU chips. And when you mine Bitcoin, it's ASIC chips. And if you look over the past 5 years, the efficiency of these machines has greatly expanded. As a metaphor, it's like cars used to get 10 miles to the gallon, and then they get 35, then they get 40. So that's what's happened to our machinery, is that it's so much more energy efficient, and how you do configurations is much more efficient. And the other big part is the software. We all have coders, we all have people that are continuously reconfiguring to maximize, because energy is expensive. It doesn't matter what you're paying, you always find it's your biggest line item in managing your business. So from that end, I come back, and I'm a global investor, and I want to explain to the amount of FUD that takes place. Living in South Texas, is we're known for fracking oil. So Matt Damon comes out with a movie, a documentary on how bad fracking is. And if you read at the bottom, at the end of the movie, it was funded by Putin's Gazprom. Read it. And the government of Qatar. So why would they do such a thing? Well, in the Middle East, the biggest shippers of LNG is Qatar, and the biggest in Europe is Russia. So naturally, they don't want fracking, and America continues with this innovation in fracking, and we become independent from importing oil and gas. And now we're net exporters of it. But the ingenuity of the KGB and Putin to go and fund NGOs, to then go and fund shutting down all the nuclear reactors, the cost of electricity in Spain and Germany is up 6-fold. That's big inflation. Without having engineers make those policy decisions of how to downgrade and slowly bring on other sources of energy, it's all done with this emotional fanfare funded by Putin and his gang. And I know this from my Latin American investments in the gold space. This is happening right today in Colombia. Venezuela, Chavez was funded originally by Cuba through Russia, and once he got control of that mechanism, he was funding through NGOs all throughout Latin America. So now you have people in Peru, Chile, they're going to take over all the mines, you have a shortage of supply, and you get this funding taking place out of Russia. So as a global investor, as money managers, we look at quant math, we look at fundamentals, but there's the granularity of looking at the risks, and we look at country risk. And one of the simplest ways is an ounce of gold is the same in the ground if it's in Canada, if it's in Russia, if it's in Kazakhstan, or South Africa, or the US. It's all the same. An ounce of gold is an ounce of gold. But why is it so much cheaper in Kazakhstan than it is $10 for a reserve in Kazakhstan, $200 in the US? How could that be? How could that be? Why? Because you'll never get it out. Because the Kazakhs will steal it from you somehow, some way. And that is, as a gold mining investor, we won't go into those countries. So you can see the wisdom of crowds actually prices many commodities, and they're now pricing electricity because it's so dear as it's like gold. And so will you be able to go mine in those countries? What are the risks? Oh, it's really cheap. But a year ago in Russia, remember, you're getting those invites, let's go to Russia to mine Bitcoin. Oh, it's just cheap, and it's hydroelectricity. Good luck, because they just confiscate your equipment. And so you have to recognize all the FUD that's out there that's taking place with this in our space of a consumption of electricity. It's 11 basis points. That's cheaper than most mutual funds. It's substantially cheaper than mutual funds and even ETFs.
So this is, for those of you who don't realize, this is pretty high quality stuff that's coming out here. You guys have been talking quite a bit about ancillary services here, and as large purchasers of electricity, you're very deeply incentivized to make as much use not only of whatever revenue you can get from running these time chains, decentralized clock, if you will. But there are many other things you can do. You've mentioned grid balancing. There's not only the fact that you can shut off load very quickly, you can shut off load in any amount, you can shut it down at whatever time you'd like. Are there any other ancillary services that you guys are looking at other than load control and size? I've heard talk about frequency modulation. Obviously, you're looking into selling heat as like something separate from this. What do you think the revenue streams for miners look like in the future in terms of how much is coming from pure hash income, how much is coming from extra services, selling heat, all of these things?
Yeah, I think you have the practical aspect. So selling heat is one. If you're in a cold climate, you can heat buildings. There are miners who dry wood, for example, where they use the excess heat to dry wood that's then used for either lumber purposes, construction, firewood, things like that. You can use it to heat greenhouses, which it's done. You also have an interesting trend. We've been talking mostly about central utility power generation. And one of the key problems with central utility power generation is you have to transmit that electricity over the grid. And the grid can only transport electricity about 1,000 kilometers, 600 miles, before the electricity is wasted. And so you have this concept called grid congestion that exists, where you may have a power plant that generates 4 gigawatts of energy here, and consumers 1,000 kilometers away who need that energy, but the grid, the bandwidth, the plumbing, the pipeline may only support half a gigawatt of transmission. So you have 3.5 gigawatts that's wasted. So the world is going to move towards more microgrids, where you're essentially generating electricity at the point of consumption. You're going to do that using renewable means where it's possible. There was an article in the FT this morning about the EU possibly mandating every new piece of construction has to have solar panels on it. If you were to look in the US, the 17 southwestern states where solar is very prevalent, you essentially can put solar in communities, community-scale power, battery backups are economically viable, and you can put a self-contained small Bitcoin mine there. Why the Bitcoin mine? Not to do anything with heat, but it can fund the build-out of that microgrid. And now you're not dependent on leveraging the grid for energy other than load balancing, which is exactly what the grid was actually built for. And so I think the bigger trend here is you're going to move from central utility to microgrid. You're going to have highly distributed Bitcoin mining using immersion technologies, where it's essentially you can leave it hands-off for a year and not have to touch it. And that will fund that infrastructure build-out. Bitcoin mining will go fund all of this renewable energy build-out. Then you start getting into things like leveraging the Bitcoin network to validate other networks, other proof-of-stake networks with its immutable hash. There are other services that can be built on top of that. And I think over time, you'll see more and more things, property data, identity data, healthcare data, things like that, more use cases, which will then build on different monetary models on top of the base layer. But there are the practical things like heating buildings, drying wood, et cetera. There's the trend towards microgrids, and then just the ability to essentially finance energy development, which is, I think, a key thing. And, I'll mention the nuclear word. I think we will see more nuclear energy come back because of what's happened here in Europe and with this energy crisis. And we're going to see small modular nuclear reactors, which are assembly line manufactured, micro nukes, if you would, very safe, self-contained. The first one in the US will be licensed for operation, I think, in 27 or 29 in Wyoming. Very cost efficient. They're not one-offs like most nuclear power plants. They're mass produced. And I think we're going to start seeing that, and that is essentially infinite energy. And then I think this whole conversation goes away.
Yeah.
And I would add that one byproduct also from Bitcoin mining is not really related to mining, but it is a layer 2 of the technology of Bitcoin, which is called a Lightning Network, which is very interesting because it allows anyone in the world to have very fast transaction and at almost no cost, and also very importantly, not using energy or very, very low energy. So I think it's something that we're going to see more and more usage in the coming weeks and months and years. And it's really going to be very important for not only miners, but for people who want to use Bitcoin in a circular economy.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I've always taken quite a lot of offense to the Bitcoin mining energy footprint per transaction metric that has been kind of shamelessly tossed around for a few years, and obviously Lightning Network kind of pulls the rug under the feet of that whole metric, which is a bit nonsensical. So before we're sort of nearing the end, obviously ESG is one of the big topical themes of public investment these days. You know, as miners and as publicly listed entities, you also have fiduciary duties. What's more important, profitability or ESG?
Profitability or what?
Or ESG?
They go hand in hand if you're doing it right.
Yeah. So, you know, I wanted to do an edgy example. You know, so say that you were offered like 2-cent coal power long-term contract. You had the only other choice you had was 8-cent hydro. What should a miner do?
Well, a publicly traded miner is going to really struggle with a coal decision there.
Yeah.
Because ultimately we need institutional investors. Our institutional investors are looking at us being good corporate citizens, and that would not be an example of good corporate citizenry.
So, knowing that, it's a great word.
I like it. It's fun to say.
Knowing that Bitcoin mining is possibly one of the most global industries there's literally no barrier for anyone to mine anywhere. Does this worry you in terms of jurisdictions with less pressure on these types of issues coming in and mining at a much lower cost in a way that would be considered unsavory in our jurisdictions?
I think, so let's start with the hit list. Russia has so much nuclear energy they don't use that's priced at sub 2 cents today that, as Frank mentioned, they were inviting Bitcoin miners to come mine. Putin could go buy a couple $2 billion worth of Bitcoin miners, set up a Bitcoin mining operation, and be in the mining business. Kazakhstan has a coal problem, and they're running out of coal, so they just chopped their mining capacity by about 50%. China cut crypto in China for a lot of reasons, not least of which energy and then security was their other one. So I think the problem is the developed world is clearly on an ESG trend of wanting to slow down global warming. There are other countries that are trying their best, but India and China are still huge polluters. India certainly doesn't have a pro-crypto perspective, especially in how they're taxing it. China currently doesn't have a pro-crypto. Doesn't mean they couldn't flip-flop back. Russia may or may not go into the mining business, but one of the biggest benefits, I think, to the shutdown in China last year is that a lot of mining moved to North America, and North America is approaching 50%. And I think, today we're going to continue to see, mining build out in the developed world. I don't think we'll see Europe grow very much in total capacity because of the energy constraints, but certainly Latin America, Africa, Middle East is definitely going to be a hotbed in North America, and we'll see 75% of the world network outside of bad hands. But that being said, I think generally the trend is, for public companies at least, good corporate citizenry. We have many stakeholders. Our investors are just one of our stakeholders. The world, our employees, society, if you would, our vendors, partners. And we need to serve all their needs. And Marathon, I'll speak for myself, but I think I can speak for the industry, generally speaking, is we're all very focused on, we want the world to be a better place for our kids and grandkids. And we're going to do whatever we can to make it happen. The government's to prohibit the use of renewable energy for Bitcoin mining. I think that would be a huge shot in the foot by governments. Could governments put a tax on Bitcoin mining produced using fossil fuels? Yes. but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, other than maybe in some local jurisdictions. But.
And also, if I may, at the end, it's not our role to decide what should be the energy mix of the country where we operate. We are Bitcoin miners. You provide energy, sell us the energy, and we make the most of it by being super efficient. We decided to go in a place where the energy is 100% renewable. 98% of the Bitcoin has been mined so far. We are not going to go back in time anyway. Some miners are using a technique called flare gas. They are using flare gas to convert it to electricity. It's taking a bad and it's transforming it into a good. Though I think it's some things that are important to note also in the industry at the end.
So last question then, is Bitcoin mining an ESG investment?
Is it what?
Is it an ESG investment?
It is an ESG investment, yeah. I believe it is, and lots 100%. Of investors want to invest into it.
We're data centers and we're technology, and that sector trades between 25 and 30 times earnings, and you can buy this for under 5. This is a screaming buy, this category.
Yeah, and we've been talking only about environment, but there's also the S and the G in the ESG, which is also very important. And Bitcoin and the fact that we can bring a financial solution to the world, I think it's also very much important.
Yeah, I think so much time is spent in the developed world talking about the developed world aspects of Bitcoin as an asset. What you have to look at is, what do digital assets and Bitcoin do for people in the undeveloped world or the underdeveloped world? There are billions of people on this planet who can't have bank accounts, and Bitcoin and other digital assets provide them with the ability to transact and do business, even though they can't have bank accounts. The reason El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender was not because they wanted to have a fight with the IMF or the US. It was because 23% of their GDP are foreign remittances of between $150 and $200 a month, of which fees applied and earned by MoneyGram and money transfers could be anywhere from 25 to 40% of that remittance. By eliminating those costs, by moving remittances to the Lightning Network, which can process more transactions than Visa, MasterCard at a fraction of a penny per transaction, all of a sudden that extra revenue flows into the country's GDP. That alone is justification for them to do it. Forget about the other stuff. So the third world has a huge use case for digital assets and crypto, and it's only really just starting. The developed world just views it as a risk-on asset. And I think over time, you'll find more 401ks, more ETFs, more investment allocators will allocate 1 or 2%, just like they do to art or other alternative assets. And that will be trillions of dollars of capital going into Bitcoin, which is very different from the third world use cases. But digital assets have use cases that far exceed just an asset class for those of us who are wealthy enough to invest in it.
And all this for only 0.1% of the total energy consumption.
Hear, hear.
No, but it's...
Nice closer.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. We're out of time, and I think we'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
You don't have questions, right?